Hey everybody, how's everybody doing today? My name is Jose Delgado. I'm with EPIConferences. We're going to be talking to Sam Prokop from Gunsler Law today for our 20-minute conversation. Your quick drive time to work. So, well, if you are going to work, if you're not going to work, this is your non-smoker smoke break. I got you. I know who you are. So today we've got Sam Prokop here, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about mergers and acquisitions and what is that next step, because the healthcare industry is catching up to what other industries have learned about business and how to scale and how to grow and what to do when I want to ride off into the sunset, whether that's to a nice tropical island or, using the old Corona slogan, where's your beach? Let's find that beach. She helps you get there. So Sam, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to jump right into it, Sam. So I know that we were talking about mergers and acquisitions, and I know that there's a couple different ways in which it can be structured and the different kinds of groups and entities that are kind of dabbling in the healthcare industry and moving into it a little bit more. What's going on out there right now?
Good question. Right now, we're seeing a lot of consolidation. You're seeing a lot of smaller practices that are getting squeezed from payers. They're finding it harder to leverage those payers and negotiate good rates. So I think that's probably our primary economic driver right now. And then with COVID-19 hitting and a lot of these executive orders with different states, and especially in Florida, that shut down elective procedures for a while, we're seeing a lot of physicians that have really struggled. And I think that that's going to also, initially we thought when COVID hit that we were going to see, and we saw a temporary kind of pause on the merger and acquisition work, but now it is back in full force. And I think we're going to continue to see huge growth in that area and consolidation.
Well, so that's interesting because, I imagine that if you're in the healthcare industry right now, you either saw a productivity increase, but a revenue not matching the productivity during COVID, or you saw a precipitous drop in your production in your healthcare office. So how would you kind of set up that valuation post-COVID? Because I know that real estate even is like, if you want to buy a house right now, you got to guarantee that you have a job and that you're going to keep the job somehow. So how do you even structure something like that?
Yeah, COVID-19 has really impacted valuations, and it's a really important consideration if you're looking to buy or sell. We're seeing buyers look at to leverage, right? If I'm looking at past 12 months of earnings, that's going to obviously, we're going to see a decrease starting March or maybe April, May. There's a little bit of lag, as we know, in healthcare when you submit the claim and you get paid. Also, you've got to take into account, you've got the PPP loans have also become an issue in a lot of these acquisitions, especially if you're going to sell or you're going to purchase. Who ends up, if you don't meet the requirements and there's a payback, if you don't qualify for loan forgiveness, which side ends up paying that? How do you straddle that over, pre-sale and post-sale? So you've got to really address that in the documents, and even the HHS stimulus funds. I call it the magic money that just showed up in providers' bank accounts.
Yeah.
Everyone gets those confused. Well, the magic money too, there are still certain attestations and requirements you had to meet. So that's something that on these mergers and acquisitions, you really have to look at and take into account. One of the things, you can do, there's several different strategies. Number one, I say get a valuation expert on both sides, whether you're buyer or seller. I know it's a few $1,000s, but that can be the difference between millions on a sale. So valuation experts, they can help develop ways, sometimes we just carve out COVID issues. Sometimes we go back and look at a longer period, and it really depends on whether we're on the buy or sell side and what, you look at it and go, what's more advantageous? And you try and negotiate that's the, the time period we're looking at.
Oh man. I know that I'm terrible at math, so when we start getting too deep into the numbers, it gets really complex. I get a headache really quickly, but it kind of sounds like this is a horrible GPA situation. I have a bad 9 weeks, and all of a sudden it just ruins everything. I go from a 3.5 to a 2.5 very quickly in my GPA. So this, even if you go longer, how do you kind of balance that out? You're not going to be able to wipe it out completely, or even just, do you think that carve out's going to be nice and and clean? Because I know that some places in Florida, they're just starting to get back to work now because of the delays in, all right, now we're back at work, but we've got to put everybody back on the books and the time it takes to get the pre-authorizations and to get everything in place. They're just starting procedures back up. So how do you kind of carve out 6 months out of your fiscal year right there?
We're finding in negotiations that even if you're on the buy side, right, you're looking at it and going, these practices, COVID makes or breaks them, right? I mean, they either are strong enough to make it through, or it may be an opportunity. We've definitely seen, I'll tell you, in partner buyouts, I've seen that leverage to say your shares are not worth as much as they used to, right? On business divorces, I'm seeing that on individual physician buyouts. What I'm finding with private equity groups is they understand that and they're not really concerned. They have the cash, they know the potential. You look at the operating history of these practices, every practice has been impacted, including hospitals, right, by COVID. So you're still going to be pretty much in line with market. They know there's going to be a recovery. If you're running your practice efficiently, there should also be an upside. I always tell people, the need for your knee surgery didn't go away just because of COVID. You're just now going to have an influx. You couldn't do it for a while. You're going to have an influx of patients. So I really do think that if you wait long enough, you're going to be able to make up those revenues, but there's definitely strategies to carve it out. Or do you look at 2019, 2018, 2017? That's what we're doing with a lot of deals. And so you can kind of look at this period as an outlier and try and carve it out. But for the most part, I think private equity understands and they're not worried about it. They have the they're going to be bringing the cash to infuse in these practices, and they know the potential. And this is really, a temporary issue that we're dealing with.
So you mentioned private equity. I've been hearing that running around a little bit. It's kind of interesting to me that private equity is jumping into the healthcare industry now rather than about 5 years ago, really, when, there were a lot more wild west subsectors of the industry. I still think telemedicine is one of those subsectors that it can get a little squirrely. Like there's a lot of gray area because it hasn't been very well defined. So I mean, what are the pros and cons of getting into bed with a private equity? Because let's say I want to buy a partner out, but I want an influx of cash to scale up my business. What's the difference between a private equity group and getting an SBA loan, or going to a bank and getting a conventional loan to really grow this through and past COVID?
It's a great question. I think your real difference is a relationship versus a transaction. And in some respects, private equity investment is probably a transaction, right? They're looking to hold on usually for 3 to 5 years, infuse things, keep growing your practice, consolidate, and they're looking to get the biggest return they can for their investors. So what we typically see on these sales is, they'll come in and say, look, we're going to buy your practice, but there's going to be a cash out option, because a lot of the physicians go, I'm not ready to give up my practice. You may have an opportunity for a cash plus rollover option, where they give you some equity in the overarching company or portfolio of companies within the private equity group. That's what we're seeing a lot of, is a rollover option, so that the physicians are part of something bigger, going forward. And I always tell clients, I said, you can own the entire pie, and yes, you get 100% of the pie, but it's only worth X. When you get this private equity group, if you could grow this exponentially, yes, you may only now own 10%. But it's a lot bigger piece of pie. And so you've got to look at that bigger picture. And, for physicians, it's also great. A lot of them, I'm finding, don't want to deal with administrative stuff anymore. What's great with these private equity groups is they can come in. Some of them are silent partners. You'll never see them. They let the physicians run. More often, what I'm seeing is kind of this relationship where they keep the current, staff executives in place, but they're also going to instill some of their own executives and leadership. And they're doing this all over the country. They have amazing systems and an amazing ability to really make things efficient. And so it can really be a good relationship where everybody's rowing in the same direction, and they're not going to be in there forever. Typically, private equity groups do not want to own forever. It's a 3 to 5 year out for them. They're going to grow it and they're going to sell it again.
Gotcha. Okay. So, is this the kind of private equity group? Because I imagine we're going to start seeing some of these scaled businesses start looking at, hey, maybe we want to make a stock market play. Are these private equity groups just going to turn around to sell to another private equity group, or somebody's got deep pockets? Are they, looking to take this to that next level and really get into, all all right, we're going to sell it to the stock market, sell it an IPO, and that's our exit strategy, and then let the board do what it may afterwards because we're out of here?
Yeah, a lot of, it really depends on the group and what they're looking for. If there's an opportunity to go public, that's certainly a possibility. But more often, what I'm seeing is they're looking to say who really has an interest in buying this. And what's been really surprising is we've seen insurance companies actually interested in purchasing healthcare practices. So in a lot of these models, the ultimate purchaser that, we've got in mind is actually some type of managed care model where an insurance company may be interested in purchasing because this helps with their vertical integration and they can control costs.
Gotcha. Okay. That would make sense with some of the conversations I've had with, Tessie, for example, with the billing company, where we're seeing more things end up in a capitated kind of a contract. They're not calling it an HMO. They're calling it, or a capitation contract. They're calling it quality payments. Different buzzwords based on the environment. Okay, interesting. So if let's say I'm a doctor of a certain age, I finally paid off my student loan debt from med school. So I'm my early to mid 50s. What do I need to be looking at in order to have that exit strategy and be able to enjoy the time with my kids? Because I missed out on my time with my kids, so my grandkids. How do I structure this so I can start getting ready to ride off into the sunset?
Well, there's only so many hours in a day, and a lot of the strain I think that comes on physicians is that, right? They're running a private practice, then they do their surgeries or they see patients in office, then they've got to run to the hospital and they're doing that at night, and there's just not a lot of downtime. And so I think to the extent that you can work smarter, not harder, and you can get some passive investments, it's helpful. So one of the things that, I recommend people look at is build your group practice. If, scale and volume are your two biggest leverage points with payers. If you get enough patients, they're going to be interested, they're going to work with you. If you have enough volume, you're not going to have to worry about, killing yourself. If you can hire more people, you can get things done and you can get better rates. Can you look at real estate investments? If you own your building, if you want to invest, attract other physicians to grow your practice, I've got a lot of people and a lot of physicians who just want to be solos, and that's fine. But if you ever want to attract good long-term talent, they're going to want to be partners or shareholders of something bigger at some point. And so developing that group practice model and developing a model where, yes, we have a partnership track or we have a shareholder track. Maybe we have some ancillary investments in real estate or some diagnostic imaging. There's a whole host of things, management services organizations. There's a whole host of ancillary service lines that can help generate revenue for practices. And it just depends on, what people have an appetite for, but we can definitely help, structure that and get to consolidation and really mass.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm trying to look and see how we can, and are there certain subsectors of the industry that right now there's a high value, like, hey, sell now if you're thinking about it, versus other ones that are like, hey, you're going to probably want to hold on because it's a bear market for you. Are you seeing any movement in which sectors are moving pretty quick?
Home health right now seems to be a lot of consolidation, but I will tell you pretty much any practice area right now. We're seeing it in oncology. I'm seeing it in orthopedics a lot. Pretty much anything that can be impacted by payer rates. And, this is really for physicians that aren't owned or controlled by hospitals, right? You have your hospital employees. This is not the model. This is for what I call the GDIs, my gosh darn independence, right? We want to grow this. We want to remain independent. We don't want to be employed by a hospital. That's really where these models work best. And for that entrepreneurial physician who, and again, it's looking at private equity, how do you get there? How do you get somebody interested in your practice? And there's a lot of things that you can do that will generate that interest. So I'm really not seeing it in any specialty area, but it may be just the line of work I do. I'm seeing a lot in home health right now, a lot in oncology, and a lot in ortho.
Okay. So then switching tactics, right? So let's say that I'm not the boomer in this scenario. I'm the one fresh out of med school, fresh looking for an opportunity, or I found a new opportunity. how do I have that conversation with my boss slash mentor? Because really it is a lot of those kinds of situations where now you're transitioning out of school and into real life, and into private practice. How do I have that conversation? What kind of stuff should I be looking at? How do I want to, who do I need to talk to start trying to set up, either a takeover of the practice, whether it's hostile or incremental, or even starting my own little outfit? What kind of things should I have buttoned up and ready before we come talk to you?
Sure. So I think the first question that you need to ask yourself is, am I going to do this myself, and do I have the experience, or do I have the financial wherewithal to hire people to help me? If I have somebody starting a new practice, the first thing I tell them, the number one person you need is a qualified biller coder, right? Somebody that knows what they're doing. That's where you're going to get in the most trouble. If I'm looking for someone that's joining a practice, which is more what I see nowadays, you go in there and you look. It's not unusual to have 2 to 3 year partnership tracks for, new practices. So when you go in and you're negotiating that first contract, look at it. And, obviously you're not going to come in and say, I have no experience, I want to be a partner, but let's develop that relationship. I do have long-term goals to stay here. What does my future look like? What are my opportunities? And I will tell you, there's plenty of practices that are solo practitioners own, and they have no interest in adding new partners. You want to know that going in. Do you just want to be an employee, or do you want to be a shareholder, a partner, or leader at some point? And you need to ask those questions. Your bigger group practices that are willing to open up, equity ownership, they're the ones I think that are going to attract the best talent, because you're going to get those motivated physicians that keep wanting to climb the ladder, that keep wanting to participate, and you're going to get that financial alignment and integration, and you're going to keep people long-term.
Okay, cool. So is this, are you seeing this where if I'm, someone my age, mid-30s, and I've been working at my practice for 2-3 years, are you seeing that the buy-in as ownership, I need to come with cash to the table, or is this something kind of granted, and part of maybe perhaps my performance bonus goes to my buy-in? Like, how are you kind of seeing that, and what kind of liability should I be looking at if I'm looking at that kind of a model?
It all depends. Sometimes the practices have nominal buy-in amounts, right? You're there, you've done your time, it's a nominal amount. Some of them that have the ancillary, we've got the imaging equipment. We also have a management services organization. We also have real estate. Some of them mandate that you invest in all of those. They want their partners, if they're going to be on the board and they're going to participate, to have an interest in all of those ancillary revenue lines. And so they may mandate that. That could be several hundred. I've seen anything from $10K buy-in to several $100,000 buy-in, and you go to a bank and you finance that. So it just depends, but that's why you want to ask those questions up front. How are they doing the valuations? How do you get in? How do you get out? So that you can start planning in advance when you start at your new practice.
Interesting. So I imagine that the more complex this gets, the cleaner the divorce gets, because everything's kind of already buttoned up by another lawyer or another accountant saying, these are the numbers, this is what this is what that is. Does that sound about right? Or do you see that the divorces are messier with those larger consolidated groups?
We're dealing with physicians. It's always difficult. No. The breakups are never easy. What I find is a lot of times, even when you have the number one thing to do to protect yourself and make it easy is to have good documents, right? To kind of account for, here's how you get in, here's how you get out, and here's what everybody's going to pay. This is how valuations are done. It's looking at your shareholders' agreements. And, I also find some practices like to make these overly complex and try to do the what if scenario for everything. Sometimes that ends up working to your detriment, because you spent so much time with all these scenarios, you kind of miss the big picture. And sometimes it's better. I like to leave my documents broader to account for broader situations and give the board some leeway. But, fair market value discussions, again, getting those valuations. Is your CPA going to do it? Are you just going to state every year what the valuation is? So if someone comes in or leaves, it's the same. Another important thing you need to look at is for compliance purposes. These practices have to be really careful. If you're letting someone buy in at $10,000 because that's what you say is fair market value, and then you go, all of a sudden somebody wants to leave and they're demanding $500,000 for their shares because that's what they thought they were worth. Like, how are you dealing with those discrepancies? I see this a lot in divorces, right? Physicians get divorced. And so for purposes of a divorce, they'll go get the lowest valuation they can find and try to devalue the shares because they don't want their, ex to have the shares. And then a year later, the practice wants to turn around and get private equity investment, or they want to sell. And guess what? You've got this low ball valuation we're now dealing with. So, I really try to address those up front and have just formulas set in advance, or here's how we're going to determine it, so that whether people are coming in or going out, you've got it addressed.
Interesting. So, I mean, and I'm sure that you and I could really get into the weeds on this and be here all day, but I believe that this kind of gives everybody a kind of, 10,000-foot view on the conversation and anything else, and kind of how you can really bring value to those kinds of future conversations for the practice. Like, what is the future? Is there a future for the practice at all? Or do we just, piecemeal and sell this whole thing and everybody have a nice day? So how would I get a hold of you if I wanted to, extend this conversation, or if any of our viewers wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, Sam, can we talk? I have this situation specifically. What can we do, or what can I do now that I've already signed on the dotted line? Because I was afraid of the legal fee of, having that conversation. So how can our viewers contact you?
So feel free to reach out to me via email or phone. My email is sprokop, that's SPROKOP @gunster.com. Or my cell phone number is 330-419-0875. Reach out. It's never too early to have these conversations, whether you're a new physician that wants to join a partnership, whether you're an existing practice and you're thinking of attracting investors, or you want to set up some type of group practice investment model. And what I tell people too is, if you want private equity, there's a 2 to 3 year lead time where you should probably be getting your house in order, getting your documents together, making sure your ownership documents are up to date. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to help you prep, and you should really be looking at that 2 to 3 years in advance, not 2 to 3 weeks in advance when you call your attorney and you say, hey, we've got these potential investors we want to move. There's a lot of things you can do. And the reason that's important is if you can show that you're a sophisticated seller, that your house is in order, that your records are cleaned up, that you've done your own diligence, and you get all that stuff cleaned up, it can significantly increase the value of your practice so that you're getting maximum value. So it's really important to have that done before you even engage in conversations with, potential investors.
Gotcha. No, that sounds great. So, guys, thanks for coming by and hanging out with us for our conversation. Sam, I'd like to thank you again for sitting down with us. I look forward to some of the feedback and questions that you, the viewers, send us over at EPIConferences.com, or through our Facebook page, or even our YouTube page. So come check us out, and would love to actually be able to put a face with the name with some of the conversations we have in late April, early May at our in-person conference in Orlando, Florida at the Portofino Bay Hotel. By the way, for the kids, Universal's a boat ride away. So it might be something interesting for you there to check out. So guys, thanks for coming. And Sam, thank you again, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Great, thank you.